The topic we are going to study today is locality sensitive hashing. The name does not convey much to you right now. It will convey the idea later on. So let's first try to get the motivation for what we are going to do. We have done association rule mining in the previous chapter, and there the idea was that every product is bought by some customers and so on. And we wanted to find out association between products. In a way, we wanted to find out how different products are similar to each other, right? Now, what happens is, as number of products have increased over time, and online retail and diversity of products have increased, and the amount of data have increased so much, we now have actually millions of products and millions of customers. So which means that each product is actually represented in the customer space. That means each customer is a dimension, right? So the data is extremely high dimensional. Obviously, is there any question? Hello?
No, sir, not yet.
Okay, who was talking? Anyway, those who are not talking, please go on mute. Yeah, so obviously the one of the main use cases is you want to recommend products bought by similar customers, okay? Or you want to find out similar products, right? Online advertising, not only for products but also for other things. What we have is we have billions of websites and billions of customer actions. And the goal is, one of the main goals is advertise pages to users who visited similar web pages. Then text search, text clustering. We have billions of documents with millions of terms or words. And then what you want to do is you want to find documents with similar terms. There are several use cases of these, not only just search or similar terms. And then there is graphics, where you have a huge number of image features. And what you want to do, you want to find similar images. Well, there are many applications. We will have a quick look at one. We will not go into the details of that technique separately, but it's a nice application to look at, okay? So there are many aspects in the world today where you actually find very high dimensional data. And our goal will be, how can we efficiently find similar items in there? Because the key problem is find similar items. The scenario is very high dimensional data. And most traditional algorithms become computationally very challenging or infeasible in very high dimensions. All right. Okay. Okay, so what we have here, we have a nice picture, probably somewhere in Switzerland or northern Italy, somewhere like that. The one problem with this picture in the aesthetic sense is that there is this, top of the church, which is kind of disturbing. So we don't really get the nice view. So one interesting application could be you remove this part. Well, how to remove edge detection and all these things you will study in the PRIP course. But the main goal here is not that. Main goal here is what can you do if you can find similar items fast, okay? So then you search for similar images among many images. Suppose there are lots of images here, you search and you find k most similar images, okay? So once you find k most similar images, well, let's say there are a lot of them, and all of them have some hill kind of a thing on the right, or most of them, and some lake and things like that, right? Okay, so they are similar images. And then you can reconstruct the missing part like this. Well, so, or the missing part means the missing part which you want to be missing, right? The top of the church to be missing. Obviously, you got the boats for free here. So let's not go into the debate of whether this is what we want to do, but yeah, well, it's an interesting application nevertheless. So this is an example of what can be done with images, finding similar images. But that's not the main goal here. Our goal is to look at a general technique of efficiently finding similar items. So let's look at the story of higher and lower dimensions. So what happens as dimension increases, the average distance between points increase, okay? And less number of neighbors, we get less number of neighbors in the same radius, okay? So let's explain this with this simple picture. So suppose we are looking at one dimension. So this is just a line, right? And suppose we have a point here. And what are the neighbors of this point? Let's say this yellow circle that we see. Other points within that are the neighbors, but it's just a line. So this means it's just an interval that we are looking at, not really a circle, right? So these 2 points are not really close to the green point, whereas the red points are actually close to the green point. Okay, so this is what we will see if we see the data in one dimension. Now what happens if we add a dimension? Suppose we know another dimension about all these data points. Okay, the points are the same. Okay, we just know another set of information, another attribute, and that is another dimension. And then maybe the points are actually like this, right? So just verify for yourself that the 2D, if you project it on 1D, you will actually get this. Again, it's just a hand-drawn thing, but that's just the intuition. So what we see here is that the red points, which seem to be very close, may not actually be very close to the green point, right? Whereas, well, some of them can be. So there is one red point still in the circle, but well, the points which were close before are not close anymore, which means in the same distance neighborhood, we get less and less neighbors. And the data becomes sparse. By sparse, we mean, not dense, right? So intuitively not dense. So data becomes very sparse. That we'll see more mathematical representation of sparse later. So the intuition is when there is only, so let's try to get an intuition of this scenario instead of just geometry. Let's also think about our life. Let's say 30 years ago, there were not so many products in the market. Okay. So I love to eat biscuit, and maybe another friend of mine also loved to eat biscuit. But then since there are only 2-3 kinds of biscuits available, we both ate the same biscuits. Now 30 years later, the same brands, or there are many more brands, and even the same brands have released, launched many different flavors of biscuits. And now I eat some 2-3 choices of biscuits, and maybe my friend eats different choices of biscuits, right? So when the number of dimensions is small, then 2 points may seem very close, that or 2 people or 2 products may seem very similar. However, when the number of dimensions increase, then when the number of products increase, then different customers tend to differ in their choices, right? So that's the intuition that comes from our life, right? Or even more philosophically, when you dig deeper into people's choices, as you go deep and deep, then people start to differ more. So so this is what happens, and because there are so many choices, that means there are so many dimensions. Let's look at our 4 scenarios again. So product recommendation. Product recommendation, well, there are lots of products and lots of customers, but most customers do not buy most products. I mean, if you think about how many different products are there in Amazon or Big Basket. Okay, I mean, I'm telling you of online retail. So you can also think of any big supermarket where there are lots of products. How many different products have you actually bought ever, right? So you as a single person have actually bought very less number of them. So most customers do not buy most products. Online advertising, most users do not visit most pages, right? So web search, the scenario was that we have billions of documents and millions of terms. What would be the corresponding statement in this case? Anybody?
Most users do not search beyond the first or second page of Google website.
Yeah, that is true. But our point was documents and terms, just as the data, right? So the I mean, so documents and terms, well, we can say that, so what you said corresponds to search queries and users. And in case of documents and terms, the reality is most terms are not present in most documents, right? And in case of graphics, most images do not contain most features, and so on. So you can find other similar scenarios, and when the dimensionality is very high, the sparsity will prevail. So recall that our goal is to find similar items, and in the high dimension, not only computation becomes harder, but data sparseness poses another challenge for capturing similarity between items. Because when two different items actually have nothing in common, right? So it's possible that I and you, we don't buy any product in common, right? Does it mean we are absolutely different? Not really, right? So that's actually another problem. So what people do, these challenges motivate the use of dimension reduction. Well, there are lots of different dimension reduction techniques. What we are going to see today is not actually called as dimension reduction, yeah, we'll go to dimension reduction in the next chapter. But what we will do today is we'll see an efficient mechanism of hashing to find similar items quickly. So let's come back to this kind of a picture again, 2 dimension and 1 dimension. What happens if we reduce dimension? If we map from higher dimension to lower dimension, I mean visually 2 to 1, let's say, then if 2 points were near to each other, they will remain near to each other, right? So the blue and the pink points, so they were near to each other, they will definitely remain near to each other. Their distance cannot increase. However, if 2 points are far from each other, well, it's possible that after the mapping, they will remain far from each other. You can see some of the gray points are still far apart from the blue point, but it is also possible that the points which are far apart actually come closer. Now, that means we have an uncertainty. The question is, can we reduce dimensionality in a way so that the distances are preserved? Obviously, I mean, if the distances were absolutely preserved, then it would have been magic and there would not have been any challenge, right? So that we cannot hope. But can we do it in a way so that the distances are preserved with high probability, right? So everything we're going to see from now on are probabilistic. So the distances are preserved with high probability, right? So that's what we are trying to do. So let's take one particular scenario of the ones that we discussed, and let's actually try to solve that problem. So let's say given a text document, our problem is find other documents which are similar. Okay. Now in this particular case, we don't really mean by similar, we don't really mean it's like searching. It's rather what we mean is they have very similar set of words, or to be even more specific, let's consider the scenario that they have several sequences of words overlapping. You can think of these as applications to be clustering of search results or news articles, right? So let's say, you know, something has happened. Okay, so regarding a sports, some cricket match yesterday, many newspapers or online news portals, they have published articles, right? And what you can expect when you search news on Google, Google is aggregating the results, right? So when you search news on Google, Well, obviously Google can give you all the results as separate article, separate documents. Or what they can do is they can actually cluster them together and present you, okay, these are all similar articles, right? So that's one application of that. So cluster news articles. And in that case, what will happen is you can expect that several sequences of words, not only several single words, but rather several sequences of words may actually overlap. Well, this is a case where they will overlap without somebody copying from someone, or web spam is another scenario, which is in this particular use case may not be so prevalent now, but it used to be, because people have taken care of it now. So for example, what used to happen is, suppose there is a web page which is very highly high page rank. We'll study page rank later, but suppose some web page has very high page rank and comes up in the search results very high all the time, and all those things happen. Now you actually copy that 3 to 4 times and put it into another web page just to get unfair SEO rating, right? So that's one kind of web spam. Or another application can be, have you copied, if you have written a paper, have you copied from another paper, right? So if you have done that, well, if you have just copied the idea and rewritten completely, then it's not possible. But people who want to copy actually don't want to really do that much. So what what will happen is, there will always be some paragraphs or some sentences which are ditto copied, right? So there will be some several sequences of words overlapping. So let's now, having understood different applications, let's actually think of this as our problem. So two text documents, we'll call them similar if there are several sequences of words overlapping. Okay, so that's a qualitative statement. How do we quantify that? Okay, so this was actually a paper by Andre Broder and others in 2007. So how do we actually technically define this sequences being overlapping? So let's say a document is actually a sequence of words, right? So sequence of words, you clean up metadata, you clean up HTML tags, and you clean up commas and full stops and stuff like that. And then what you get is you get a canonical sequence of tokens. Okay. Then every document is a set of subsequences of tokens of size W. Okay, what we mean is where a contiguous subsequence is called a shingle. We'll see an example of this. Okay, so an example of this is the following. Suppose your document looks like this: a car is a car is a. Okay, just a funny example. So then the foreshingling of this amount of text will be a car is a. So that's a four tokens. Then the next four size token is car is a car, right? And the next one is a car is. The next one is a car is a, but this a car is a you have already written. So you have already captured it. So it's a set of subsequences of words of size 4. Sorry, not words of size 4, set of subsequences of size 4, where each item is a word actually. So W shingling, or in this case, this is a 4 shingling, is you take every W subsequence and make a set out of that. Of course, there will be duplicates. It can happen that in a document there are some subsequences which appear many times. Well, in that case, you remove them and make it a set.
Sir, in this context, a token and a word are interchangeable.
Yes. I mean, let's just think that by token we mean a word. There are so there will be differences between a token and a word in certain scenarios of information retrieval and NLP. Let's not bother about that. That's not really the goal. The goal is we just want to, from a document, we want to get to a representation of a set. Okay. So the special case of this would have been 1 shingling, and that is just given a document the set of words. Right? 2 shingling would be given a document the set of bigrams, two-word sequences, right? So that's the scenario here. And if you simply want to capture, instead of sequences, if you simply want to capture whether two documents have similar words, then you go for one shingling. If you want to capture whether they have copied from one another and so on, then you go for larger shingling, right? So it's just, this is just one representation, and the technique actually does not depend on this particular representation. Okay. Okay. So in general, what we will have is a Boolean matrix representation of data where the columns are documents, the rows are dimensions or shingles, and every entry for a row and a column is 1 if shingle R is in document C, okay, and 0 if it is not present, right? And of course, the matrix is going to be sparse because most documents will not have most shingles, or even if you think of simple case, the most documents will not have most words. So almost all entries will be 0. Now, every document then can be viewed as a set, so set of shingles, and in each dimension, it has a 1 or a 0. So a set can be represented by a 1, 0 vector, right? So note that the technique that we are going to see here can be applied to other settings instead of documents and shingles. I'm going to talk in terms of documents and shingles because that's what the original paper presented. But the technique can be applied to products and customers. Okay, so products are columns, customers are rows. You put a 1 if this customer has bought that product in the timeline you are interested in, otherwise you put a 0, right? Web page and users, if this user has visited this web page. Okay, so basically you can actually map this scenario into all those contexts. So customers as rows, products as column, features as rows, images as columns, all those things. The same technique will apply. Yes, somebody has a question.
So when we make this list of shingles,
yes,
we take the shingles of all lengths, right? Starting from 1 up to.
No. You fix a W.
Okay.
Okay. You fix a W, but again, I mean, the technique really does not differ if you choose all 2 shingles and 3 shingles, right? I mean, you can choose to take. It's just like you are extracting features. Maybe too early to use the term extracting features in the context of this course and other courses, but it's just like what kind of attributes are you extracting? Okay, either this attribute is present in this document or present in this item or not present. All right, so that's it. I mean, in this particular paper, they talked about fixing a size W and then going for a W shingling. But yeah, if you want to, you know, take multiple Ws, nothing will be a problem. Because a 4 shingle is clearly different from a 3 shingle all the time, right? So 4 shingle cannot be same as a 3 shingle, right? So there will not be any problem. Okay, so but then now abstracting out from this particular scenario of documents and shingles, we can think of this as a document is a set of attributes or set of shingles or set of words, right? So we will actually deal with 1, 0 matrices. Now, if every item or every document is a set, then their similarity can be measured by Jacquard similarity. Okay, some of you may already know what Jacquard similarity is. For those who don't, so it's a very simple one. Jacquard similarity of sets A and B is defined by the size of the intersection of the sets by size of the union of the sets. And Jacquard similarity is actually a metric. Okay, just to remind you what a metric is mathematically. So a metric is a function from the power set, from x cross, if x is a set you are considering, it's from x cross x to non-negative real numbers, 0 to positive real numbers, such that for all elements, the distance, so the function d, we'll call it a distance, metric is also called a distance. So d of xy is 0, the distance is 0 only if and only if they are the same point. That means their values are exactly the same. Okay, the distance between 2 points is the same whether you measure it from x to y or y to x, and the triangle inequality is satisfied. That means if you go via y from X to Z, if you go via Y, you cannot reduce your distance. Okay, so going in the straight way should always be shorter. So that's so Jaccard similarity, loosely speaking, is a metric. Actually, Jaccard distance is a metric. So that is 1 by this term. So Jaccard similarity is 1 by the distance. Oh, sorry, 1 minus. Sorry, not 1 by. It's 1 minus the distance, and then it's a metric. So similarity, Jaccard similarity values are always going to be. So what is the minimum and maximum? Obviously, the minimum is 0 because A intersection B can be 0, and the maximum is at most 1 because A intersection B, if A and B are the same, then A intersection B is equal to A or B, and the union is also the same, right? So the maximum value of Jaccard similarity is 1. So Jaccard similarity is a number between 0 and 1 for non-empty sets. Okay, so if you have an empty set, we are not defining them. So examples, similarity of these two, what should it be? 0, 1, 5, 8 and 0, 5, 11. So 0 and 5, so you have intersection, the size is 2, and the union, I have, here we have 3 and I think 5, right? So it should be 2 by 5, right? So, oops, sorry. So this should be 2 by 5. I leave the rest to you. If you have a question about Jaccard similarity, we can work out the other two, but otherwise I think you can work it out, right? So Jaccard similarity is simple. So now, so then our goal is the documents are sets of shingles, and we will measure their similarity using Jaccard similarity. And we have lots of documents, and there are lots of shingles, which means each document is a very high dimensional 1-0 vector. So how should we do it? If we do it in the brute force method, the simple way, then we'll compute pairwise similar documents. That means if we have capital N documents and the similarity the function given to us, then finding similar documents in brute force method will be very expensive because there will be order n pairwise computations, and order n square, finding pairwise similarity for all pairs will be order n square, even if we consider that computing the similarity between two documents is like constant. So even that, otherwise that factor will come in here. So that's actually linear. So if every document has dimension m, then it is m times this complexity, right? So essentially the problem here is when you cluster or when you find a pair of similar documents or pair of similar items, you have too many pairs to compare. So here, that's the problem we are going to solve. Okay. So, so we have order of capital N square pairs. Should we have to compare every document with every other document and then figure out whether they are similar, or can we do this more efficiently? All right. Okay. So that is what we are going to see. So the approach or the technique used is called locality sensitive hashing. That means we'll preserve some locality, we'll hash, but we'll hash it in a way so that we preserve some locality. Okay. So what is the idea? The idea is that if two points are close to each other in a high dimensional space, then they remain close to each other after a projection or map, right? So as we have seen in the picture. So the black points were close to each other, they will remain close to each other. However, if 2 points are not close to each other in a high dimensional space, they can accidentally or for good reasons, they can actually still come close to each other. For example, the orange point, right? Orange point here was not close to the black points, but it has all suddenly come close to the black point. Now, what we want to do, we want to map or hash in certain ways so that with high probability, this does not happen. Okay. So with high probability, this should not happen. So the setup is then again, just revisiting, documents are represented as sets of shingles. They are very high dimensional. The documents are column vectors. The set of all documents is a matrix. Each row is a feature or a dimension or the shingle. The matrix is very sparse. What we need is we need a hash function h such that if two documents are far apart, that means the distance is high, then after hashing, so you have all done hashing, right? So you know that hashing basically sends it to a number, right? One bucket or a number. So after hashing, their distance will be high with high probability. So documents which had a high distance between each other will remain high distance after hashing with high probability. And this distance, new distance dist is definitely not the same as the old distance d. In the single dimension or lower dimension, we'll find some other distance, but the distance will still be high. And if the two documents were close to each other, that means the distances were low, then the distance will remain low with high probability. So essentially, we'll hash preserving the distance with high probability. That's our goal. If we can do that, then we can apply H on all documents and put them into hash buckets or numbers, right? And those which have fallen into the same bucket, we will only compare those explicitly, right? So with high probability, then we will not miss out on similar documents, right? Because we are almost very certain that the similar documents that we want to look at, they have fallen in the same hash buckets, right? So if we can do this, then we can actually save a lot on pruning. Save a lot on comparing. Instead of order n square, we can actually do much lesser. Now, again, to remind you, this technique is not a new way to measure similarity. It is just reducing the number of candidate pairs to compare. Ultimately, your similarity will still be the Jaccard similarity, and the normal computation will prevail, right? Instead of order of capital N square comparisons, we will actually do much less. All right. Yeah. Actually, let me just show you one thing here. Why I mean much less. So, for example, let's say we have a total 100. Let's say capital N equal to 100, right? Now that means originally n square would have been 100, right? So basically that's like 10,000. So originally you would have had 10,000 pairs to compare. Now, if you can hash them into 10 different buckets, right? So 10 different buckets, and then you say, if one document is in bucket A and another is in bucket B, you don't have to compare them. So then your number of comparisons will be 10 square plus ... right? So this 10 times, right? So this means we only have 1,000 instead of 10,000. We have 1,000. Just gross intuition for why bucketing helps. You can actually mathematically this is easy to see that if you split n into smaller parts, then your total and then the sum of the squares of the smaller part is much smaller than the square of the sum, right? So that's obvious, but that's just your intuition here. Okay, so what we will do here is the min hashing. So this is called min hashing. There is a reason for this name, we will see later, but let's see what min hashing is. So suppose this is our data, okay? So this is our data. We have 10 shingles and 5 documents. And what it means is that your each row, if you have a 1, then let's say S1, the shingle 1 is actually present in document 2 and document 3 and so on. Okay, so now we will define the hash function H as the following. We'll choose a random permutation sigma of the number of dimensions. In this case, the number of dimensions is 10. So we choose a random permutation sigma of 10. That means we simply permute the numbers 1 to n, right? Sorry, 1 to m. So suppose the random permutation is like this, which means that 1 goes to 3, 2 goes to 1, 3 goes to 7, 4 goes to 10, and so on. Okay. Now, what we do, we permute all rows of the original data by sigma. That means now my first row goes to the third row, right? So S1 has gone to the third row, S2 has come to the first row, and so on, right? So basically I have permuted the rows of my data. In other words, I have randomized the shingle ordering. Now, for for a document D, the value HD or the hash value HD will be the index of the first row in which D has a 1. Okay, in which I should say sigma D has a 1. So let me just, I mean, it's obvious, but so yeah. Okay, so in which sigma D has a 1, that means after permutation, the first index, the row of the index of the first row in which I see a 1. So what will happen? HD, if we we have 5 documents, right? So the D1 the hash value will be 5, because as you can see, go from the top to bottom in D1 column, the 5th entry is 1, right? First time you see a 1 is in the 5th entry. So what will be D2, hash value of D2? That will be 2, because in the second one you see an 1, right? So that's what will happen, right? So you'll see that we have hashed the documents D1 to D5, and these are the hash values. Okay. So this is what by definition mean hashing is. All right. So is this part clear? Anybody has a question?
Sir, here how we got this sigma values?
It's just a random permutation. Okay. It's a random permutation of 1 to m.
Okay.
This is just an example. Just an example, right? You can have another. So one particular hash function, one particular mean hash function H corresponds to one particular permutation, right? So another mean hash function will essentially be defined by another permutation.
Sir, how are we permuting with sigma?
Yeah, just see that sigma, the first entry is 3. This means that the first row should go to the third row. So first row is 1 has gone to the third row. The second entry is 1. That means the second 2 goes to 1. That means the second row should go to the first row. Okay. So this is how you're doing. S4 is 10. That means S4 should go to the 10th row. Clear?
Oh, okay.
Okay. So I mean, this is technically, that's actually not the main point here, as we will see in the proof of why this works. The main point is we are randomizing the ordering of the shingles. All right. So we are essentially randomizing the ordering of the shingles, and let's see what. So this looks like, okay, so we have done something, right? So why should it help us? And let's see why it helps us. So how does mean hashing help us? So do we retain some important information after hashing high dimensional vectors to the 1 dimension? We have actually sent them to 1 dimension, right? So in this example, 10 to 1 dimension, but even if you have a million dimension, you're actually sending it to 1 dimension. So mean hash has a beautiful property. The property is the probability that D1 and D2 are hashed to the same value is same as the Jacquard similarity of D1 and D2. In other words, the probability that HD1 equal to HD2 is same as the Jacquard similarity of D1 and D2. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Which means if two documents were 80% similar by Jacquard similarity, then with 80% probability, they will go to the same bucket, or they will go to the same hash value. If two documents were 99% similar, then with 99% probability, they will go to the same hash value. Okay, so that is actually quite nice, right? So let's actually see why. You have understood the statement, right? What this means, what the property means, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. So let's actually see why this happens. On the face of it, it might look like, well, that's very strange, but we haven't really done anything that ingenious to get this. So now let's consider any two documents, D1 and D2. There are 4 types of rows. Okay, so 4 types of rows. These are the 4 types: type 11, type 10, type 01, and type 00. Okay, what does it mean? That means every row is actually 1 dimension, right? So in every row, either you have 1 in both documents, or you have 1 in the first and 0 in the second, or you have 0 in the first and 1 in the second, or you have 0 in both. Okay, so there are 4 types of rows. let nx be the number of rows of type x. That means n11 is the number of rows of type 11, n00 is the number of rows of type 00, and so on. Okay. In other words, instead of getting too mathematical, let's also describe the intuition. Remember that the rows are just the dimensions, right? In our case, the shingles, or in case of product and customer, and the products are column, customers are the dimensions, right? So essentially every column is a set. It's a 1-0 column. So n11 means the number of elements common in the two sets, right? So which means the number of rows in which both have a 1. So that means the number of elements common in the two sets, right? And n00 means the number of elements which are not present in either of the sets. Okay, so now note that the Jaccard similarity between these two documents is the number of elements common, right? So that is the size of the intersection by the size of the union. And what is the size of the union? The common plus the ones which are only present in the left side and plus the ones which are only present in the right side. So that's the union, except the 0-0, right? So the Jaccard similarity is defined by n11 by this denominator. All right. So what we have to show is that the probability that D1 and D2 will go to the same hash value, that means HD1 equal to HD2 is same as this expression n11 by this. Okay, now let sigma be a random permutation. Let's consider sigma D1 and sigma D2. That means the shuffled D1 and D2. Let J be the index of the first one across sigma D1 and sigma D2. That means instead of looking at them individually, you start to, scan them together from the top. And as soon as you see a 1 in either of them, you stop and you say that particular, that index is J. And let Xj be the type of the jth row. Now, our question is that row where you see a 1 for the first time in either this column or that column, is that row going to be a 1-1 row, or is that going to be some other kind of row? Now, the claim is if the hash values are the same and equal to J, then that Xj, that row has to be a 1-1 row. Okay. And if that row is a 1-1 row, then the hash values also must be same. So it's an if and only if condition. So why? Let's actually look at this picture. So suppose, the if and only if will actually follow both ways. You can look at the table and then say Xj equal to 1-1, or you can look at Xj equal to 1-1 then infer the table. So essentially, if you look at the table first below, right? So if you scan from the top, both D1 and D2, the first time you see a 1 in either of them, that is going to be the hash value of that particular document. If both the hash values are the same, then you are going to see the 1 first time in together. Then Xj has to be a 1-1 row. On the other hand, if you see a 1 in one of them and not the other for the first time, then the hash value of D1 is going to be 3 in this case. Sorry, hash value of D2 is going to be 3 in this case, and hash value of D1 will not be 3. It has to be something more later on. Then Xj is not 1-1. In this case, it is 0-1. So which means the type of this particular row where you see a 1 for the first time in either of the columns is 1-1 if and only if they go to the same hash value, and that is particularly that J. Now it's clear that by definition we have defined J. J is the index of the first one across both the columns, so it cannot be a 0-0, right? So it has to be a 1 in either of them at least. So it's not a 0-0. Now what is the probability that Xj equal to 1-1, right? So what is the probability that Xj equal to 1-1? The probability that Xj equal to 1-1 is, now we have randomized, we have shuffled the rows. Since the rows order are shuffled or random, the probability that Xj equal to 1-1 is the number of 1-1 rows there by the all possibilities of this J. So the number of 1-1 is n11 by all possibilities of J is the other sum of these three quantities, because it cannot be a 0, 0. We don't have n 0, 0 here. And we have already seen that this is same as the Jaccard similarity. Okay. So this is actually a, I mean, I really love this proof. This is actually a beautiful proof and beautiful property of mean hash. Questions at this point if anybody has any confusion.
Sir,
Yes.
so there are multiple 1-1s, right?
Yes. Yes.
So if there is a 1-1 at the later stage, and
Yes.
that is not the first 1-1,
Yes.
then HD1, D2 will not equal to that J.
No, no, no. The first one, see, J is defined as the index of the first one across sigma D1 and sigma D2. So even if you have another 1-1 later, right? Even if you have another 1-1 later, my J is still going to be this only, right? So J is still going to be 5. And the type of J is still going to be 1-1. Is that clear? If you have a confusion, we'll repeat. I mean, that's fine, please. So by definition, the mean hash is the index of the first one after permutation.
So here,
Yeah.
X7 equal to 1-1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. X7 equal to 1-1, but HD1 is not equal to 7. HD1 is equal to 5. Yeah.
X7 equal to 1-1, but our J is not 7.
Okay,
Our J is 5, right? So we are not interested in X7. We are interested in X5.
Yes.
Right? Yes, there will be other 1-1s below also, right? Because there will be several 1-1 rows. Our goal is after permutation of the items, after permutation of the after permutation of the dimensions, which is the first common element. Okay, so yeah, so maybe just think about this again, and if necessary, we'll explain this again. No problem. Now, one very important point here. Why was the random permutation important? The random permutation was important. Let me just go full screen. Yeah, random permutation was important because otherwise this last thing that we did, probability xj equal to 1-1 equal to the number of 1-1 rows by the total possibilities of j, total number of possibilities of what kind of row j can be, jth row can be, we cannot simply do this. And I'll give you an intuitive idea of why this is important. And actually, it's not to be ignored, okay? It's not something that we are just doing for the fancy of being statistically correct. What happens when you put documents into shingles? So let's look at, let's say, this picture, right? So what happens when you first process your data and create shingles and create this matrix? You process it document by document. So you first pick up a document, you process all the shingles, you name them shingle 1, shingle 2, right? So the ordering of the shingles actually depends on how in the order in which you process documents. Obviously, the first document will have shingles which are similar to each other. Other similar documents will have shingles which are similar to each other, right? So, and it's very much possible that, let's say, a crawler first processing all the websites of domain, isical.ac.in. There people have written similar things, right? And then going into another domain and so on. So the order in which you process documents and hence the order in which you initially may give IDs to the shingles or the dimension is not random. Especially there will be a huge correlation between when you are processing a document, right? So that's very likely, it's local. And that is why randomizing this is important. Otherwise, this probability will not work. It's the same for a customer and product data, right? So you start processing and mapping the data into a matrix form in some order. And of course, it is very much possible that you go store by store, right? So of a huge retail, you go one franchisee to another franchisee, or one store to another store, and all those things. So that's why randomization is important here. Okay, so I think we are basically, the time is up. I'll finish with this slide. So what we have done then is we have made sure that high similarity documents can go to the same bucket with high probability. But how does that really help us? I mean, intuitively we can feel, okay, we have done something great, but how much does it really help us? So if the task is given a document, find similar documents with at least 75% similarity, then if we apply this nice technique, what we will see is documents which are 75% similar to D1 will fall in the same bucket as D1 with 75% probability. Good, but what happens to the rest? Okay, the same documents may not fall in the same bucket. Okay, they will not fall in the same bucket with also 25% probability. Now, which means we'll miss some similar documents, and then there will be false positives also, right? So documents which are less than 75% similar, let's say 50% similar. Well, still with 50% probability, they may fall into the same bucket. And that's not non-trivial. So which means that we have actually made some good progress towards our goal, that with high probability, we want a distance preserving mapping, but we should be able to do better than just using one mean hash function. So in the next class, we will see a combination of different mean hash functions and how combining them will help us tuning this requirement to a very controlled scenario, which will be useful. All right, so any questions as of now?
Sir, can you go back to the previous slide?
Yes.
You made one statement that we are permuting the documents D1 and D2, and we are looking where the first one comes simultaneously, 1, 1. So can you just explain that the statement that you made, like why?
No, we are not, or we are not looking at J is the index of the first one across D1 and D2. That means, well, this may be misleading, but let me clarify. J, okay, let me actually say, maybe we'll correct it, either in or in, okay, or in both, okay. So let me just, yeah. So let's do it this way. Now it should be clear. J is the index of the first one, either in sigma D1 or in sigma D2 or in both. Does it clear your confusion?
Yeah, so in that case, J is equal to 5. So in that case, we have D1 equal to 1 and D2 equal to 1. In this case.
No, in this particular, in the first table, right? First case.
Yeah.
In the first case, J is equal to 5, then HD1 equal to 5 and HD2 equal to 5.
Okay.
Remember this, right? So what was HD1? The first one 0, second one 0, third one 0, fourth one 0, fifth one 1. So HD1 is 5.
Okay.
Second case, first one is 0, second one is 1. So HD2 is 2, right? So in this case, what happens? In the case of the left case, HD1 equal to HD2 equal to 5, equal to J. In the right case, HD1, I don't know, it will be something more than 3. HD2 equal to 3. And J equal to 3, right? But HD1 is not equal to HD2. Because HD1 will be more than 3.
Sir, what if no one is found in a particular column? Then how do we define HD?
Okay, so basically, if there is no one in one column at all, right? So this means it's a total 0 column. So this particular document has no shingle at all. So by definition, it's a phi set, right? Null set. Okay. So we are assuming we are not dealing with that because you can discard a document. It's not similar to anything, right?
Okay.
But it is definitely possible that two documents have nothing in common, right? So the ones are all in different rows. That is possible. So if that happens, let's actually explain. So if that happens, that two documents have, do we have one such scenario here? Yeah, I think D1 and D4 have no common row, right? So D4 has only two ones, S1 and S3. So these two, sorry, it's 5 and D1. So D1 and D4, the Jacquard similarity is 0, right? So no matter how you permute the rows, you are never going to see one in D1 and D4 together.
Yes, yes.
Right. So that's exactly that is the intuition behind what is happening here. So that is why, so again, Jacquard similarity is 0 because their intersection is 0. So there is no common row where you have a 1, right? You have 1 in both places. And the intersection is 0. The intersection is 5, which means the Jacquard similarity is 0. And then, since there cannot be a 1-1 row at all, well, n11 is equal to 0. That means with probability 0, they will go to the same bucket. All right. So yes, please.
So one thing, say for example, I have 25% of each of the 4, like
Okay.
0, 0. So then my Jacquard similarity will be 1 by 3.
Yes.
Then in terms of xj, if I think, means I have all the 100 combinations with me.
Yes.
I am randomly picking one after another without repetition.
Right.
Then I get my first one with probability 1 by 3, correct?
Right.
Means around
Right.
Draw should be 1, 1.
Right. So the probability that when you see a 1 in either of them, you see them together is 1 by 3.
I won't see any 0, 1 or 1, 0 also. Means I will see the
right. That probability is 1 by 3. Right.
So that means in a way I can say I should get my 0, 0s first. Means I should get
no. It's just the probability. It's not, doesn't mean that will definitely happen. It's the probability that this happens. You see a 1, 1 together. You see the first ones together in both columns is 1 by 3.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that will happen, right? It happens with probability 1 by 3.
Correct. Because what I'm saying is when I'm arranging all the hundreds, I must see a 1 at 26th entry. Even if I arrange all
yes, that is the worst case scenario, right? Definitely.
Okay, means it won't happen always. Means
it's probably right. So just get your intuition. Probability is a tricky intuition, right? So even if something has high probability, doesn't mean it will happen, right? So obviously, with the 1 minus that probability, it will not happen.
Okay.
Yes. Right.
And why is this called as min hashing?
Oh, okay. So min hashing is because min, the minimum, the minimum index for which you see the 1.
Oh, okay, fine.
Right. So the minimum index for which is the 1, you say okay. But now one interesting point. Usually I ask this in the exams, but I think I have done it few times in the last few years. So you can see the same will happen instead of if you try to see the 1 from the top. If you try to see the 1 from the bottom, the same should happen, right?
Yeah.
Right. So there is no difference. I mean, yeah. But I think computationally, when you arrange things, accessing elements from the beginning is easier. We'll see some computational issues with this in the next class as well. So yeah. Okay, folks, I think we have gone way over the time. I don't have a problem, but we are instructed to keep your gaps to 30 minutes. You have lost 10 minutes of that. So if we don't have any more questions, this is actually a very fascinating topic, min hashing. Yeah, so we'll have the next class on Tuesday on this. Let me remind you, we'll have the quiz on Monday. I'm going to send you a mail on that. We are going to have the quiz on Monday at 2:15 p.m. Well, this topic will not be part of the first quiz.
Sir, one question.
Yes.
So the topic that you taught today, locality sensitive hashing, is it in that book, mining massive data sets?
Yes, very much. In fact, this is the general reference. This is very much in that book. Yeah, please. I mean, you are actually encouraged to read the book up because that gives you a different perspective as well. So yes.
So I should read that book?
Definitely, you can read the book. And in fact, Leskovec, Rajaraman and Ullman, they run a course called Mining Massive Datasets in Stanford. And there are lecture videos, then there are slides. So a lot of materials are there, okay? For any, of course, you will not be able to read up all of them or view all of them. But if you are interested in some particular topic very much, you should read up more. It will give you perspectives of different viewpoints, and you will strengthen your intuition on those topics much better. All right, folks. So I think that's it. Bye for today. In the next class, we will continue this topic.